I'm Annalora Nixon, and this is my senior capstone, Turtles, Trees, and Tupperware, our Christian responsibility towards our planet and our future. I would like to take you to two different neighborhoods, each on opposite sides of our planet. First, imagine you were a third world school teacher in a country haunted by malnutrition. In your classroom, it's not uncommon for students to spend their lunchtime without a meal. One day, a shy little boy named Timmy raises his hand in class and he asks you a really profound question for his age. He wants to know why God won't give his family enough food. His question is troubling, and you feel led to take Timmy out to lunch, and he is filled with thankfulness for a kindness that you know could never be enough. You start to feel a deeper connection with Timmy and a renewed love for your students. A few weeks later, Timmy doesn't show up to school, and you are confronted with malnutrition's tragic and fatal effects as you grapple with Timmy's death. Now, imagine that you're a school teacher here in the US. Unlike Timmy's class, your students come in, they're holding laptops and their own textbooks, lunch arrives, and you and your students go your separate ways to enjoy your meals. A very different picture from the first neighborhood. At the current rate of resource depletion, the Earth will only have enough resources to sustain about 2 billion people by the year 2100. Currently, there are just under 8 billion lives on the Earth, 6 billion more than we'll be able to support. And of these, 15 million children a year die of malnutrition and starvation. On the contrary, in the United States, 1/3 of the population is overweight. That's a really big percentage, so the United States government has spent approximately $35 billion to deal with this obesity crisis. Not only this, but 40% of food in the United States is thrown away. If everyone in the world lived the way that people in the United States do, then it would take 5 Earths just to provide enough resources for everyone. The Earth we have was created for us, and the Bible has a lot to say about the relationship between God's creation and his people. Genesis 2:15 says, "The Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it." And we as Christians often fail to recognize the importance of how God uses his creation as a way of ultimately caring for his people. When was the last time you sat down in church and you heard the pastor remind everyone to protect the future of God's creation, or anything else that focused on sustainability? Chances are, like most Christians, you would say that the care of creation isn't covered in church. Worse than that, you might be like many other Christians who are under the impression that brushing off environmentalism is just a part of being a Christian. Believe it or not, most people outside of the church would have the same idea. This year, I was able to talk to a lot of people about these stereotypes. One of the people that I spoke with was a Christian who used to work with the Forest Service. She couldn't recall any professing Christians in her field, and God didn't stand out to her as a big part of her creation-oriented job. Not only do Christians feel the disconnect between Christianity and the environment, but non-believers feel it too. I also spoke with a non-Christian activist who couldn't imagine the church getting involved in her work. From what she could tell, Christian beliefs didn't line up with those of environmentalism. Both of these conversations helped to show me the divide between environmentalism and Christianity. It's a divisive topic, even among people with the greatest appreciation for creation. Why is this? People have always recognized the value of creation, at least for its beauty. The National Park Service was created in 1916 to preserve unimpaired the natural and cultural resources and values of the national park system for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. So, for generations, American culture has been focused on the conservation of our land. Through all this, we're failing to consider not our conservation efforts, but the sustainability of our actions and their effect on the world and their effect on our futures. We forget to consider our planet in our everyday lives, not only when we visit a national forest or a national park. This type of short-sighted environmentalism usually comes from three ideas. First, people don't think it's worth the attention. They see the earth as a God-given resource more than a gift from God. People often also think that we'll run out of resources at the return of Christ. Second, people think that there are more important things to focus on. These people would rather help individuals than they would the planet. And third, people think that it's too much work. They feel a sustainable lifestyle is unrealistic or unattainable. These three factors result in Christians who acknowledge creation is beautiful, but see no problem in depleting its resources. So, did God create the earth simply as a resource, or does he give it value worth protecting? Let's look at the Bible. Psalm 24:1 says that the earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. And Genesis 1:10 tells us that God saw that it was good. By this logic, it's easy to say that the earth is valuable, because it was created by God, and all of God's handiwork is valuable. However, there's a lot of different ways to treat valuable things, and even more ways to interpret how we should treat the earth. Genesis 2:15 tells us to work the earth and take care of it, while Genesis 1:28 tells us to fill the earth and subdue it. A lot of people find the difference between taking care of the earth and subduing it confusing. So what are we called to do? Maybe they're not so different after all. I was able to read a book on the subject this year, and it described it like this. God giving humanity dominion over creation is similar to when he gave human kings dominion over Israel. The kings didn't have their power in order to exploit their subjects, but so that their subjects would be taken care of. Similarly, humanity's responsibility to subdue creation involves taking care of it. As Christians, we're given the promise of the second coming of Christ, but Matthew 24:36 says, "But about that day or hour no one knows." So it's not something we can plan for or an excuse that we can use to brush off the future. Proverbs 27:24 says, "For riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations." Christians should recognize that the fact that our world is broken and resources aren't something that we can waste. God created the earth with the value that comes with anything that he created, and that gives us a responsibility to treat it as such. On the other hand, many Christians recognize the value that the earth has, but they feel they can't further God's kingdom as well by focusing on creation. You know, it seems easier to offer someone food than it is to help them grow their own. So, is it more important for Christians to focus their time and resources on the needs of an individual, or is it more important to focus the time and resources on the needs of the planet itself? We need to consider the correlation between the environment and poverty. We need to take the time to consider that the needs of God's people come from and can also be improved by the care of the planet. The Bible has a lot to say about this too. Proverbs 21:13 says that whoever shuts their ears to the cry of the poor will also cry out and not be answered. And this idea is heavily impacted by the fact that people affected by poverty often rely on the earth for survival. If we as Christians are to help the suffering of the world, shouldn't we focus on the root causes that will give more long-term solutions? The answer may lie in our use of the resources that we have here on Earth. Currently, 785 million people don't have access to fresh water, and much of this unsafe water can be traced back to pollution or waste. Not only does this limit people's drinking water, but it makes it harder to farm, a trade that affects every single one of us. With this in mind, we can never truly care for the poor without also caring for the Earth's soil and water. Short-term solutions to people's needs are effective. However, they're dangerous because if resources shrink in the future, it will first affect those in poverty. It's just as important to think of someone's future than it is to think of someone's present. Putting more sustainable habits into practice is a lot of work, but only if you switch everything at once. Being sustainable refers to thinking about the impact of your actions on the planet and its resources. My family and I have spent a lot of time this year thinking about how to think and act more sustainably, and we realized that some things are really easy to change, while other things are difficult. We managed to reduce our ideas into 3 main categories: reducing energy, reducing waste, and reusing what we have. First, reducing energy refers to thinking about anything that uses up extra energy. It can include things like thinking about when you use your car, or unplugging things that you're not using that might use up extra energy, or just thinking about the lights and the water usage in your home. Reducing energy can be an easy thing to incorporate into your life because it mostly deals with what you're already not using or what you don't need to use. Second, reducing waste means staying away from doing or using things that you won't completely use up. And it can look like less packaging, going for digital things instead of using paper, avoiding unnecessary plastic, or recognizing your own food waste. Reducing waste can be an easy addition to your lifestyle because it only involves using things you don't use. Finally, reusing what you already have might be the easiest of them all. It takes reducing waste further, and it gives your household items an environmental purpose. It can be bringing your own bags to the grocery store, or your own cups to a coffee shop, and yes, even bringing your own straw to a restaurant. These 3 categories are helpful, but most importantly, reducing energy, reducing waste, and reusing what you already have are only ideas on how to live more sustainably. More than anything, sustainability is a mindset that sees opportunities to help in new places. So, this brings us back to the question: are Christians involved in the care of creation? No. Everything I've witnessed this year says no. Creation and sustainability is something that I truly believe is good and should be important to Christians. Whether or not you're in the third world neighborhood with Timmy or you're here in the US, our actions affect the planet and the lives of everyone. The Bible tells us about our responsibility towards our planet, but we still take it for granted and we selfishly treat it as a resource. We can always assume that someone else will save the planet, but at the end of the day, Christians have a special responsibility, not only for God's creation, but for his people. Think about it. How cool is it that we're lucky enough to be able to make such a big impact on the world with only a few adjustments to our lifestyle? In order for God to truly be glorified in his work, the world must come together to appreciate what he's created. So, if you're a Christian and you want to further God's kingdom in a new way, remember the value that God gives his creation and consider your impact on the planet in your everyday life. Thank you very much.